Well, meanwhile, ahead of tonight's opening ceremony in Rio, anti-Olympic protests are flooding the streets. Jamie Yuccus is in Rio de Janeiro. Jamie, tell us, we know not everyone is excited about the Olympics, especially people living there in Rio. They're calling the games a symbol of corruption and the domination of the wealthy. But what kind of reaction are you seeing from protesters?
I have to tell you, Rena, you just hit the nail on the head. That's really what's been happening here. When you talk to Brazilians, they say, you know what, this is a chance to show the world our country. But we were promised that things were going to get cleaned up. Things were going to be better for us because of the Olympic Games, and they've actually gotten worse. So let me go ahead and show you what's happening right now. A couple hundred people have gathered in this little plaza area that's about a 20-minute walk from the stadium where the opening ceremony will take place tonight. Now, these protesters are specifically protesting the Olympic Games. There were protests earlier today you may have seen online and in different video where they were at Copacabana Beach. They were protesting as the Olympic torch was being moved through the different areas. That was because of the government corruption that you talked about. So the police here are somewhat concerned that these two groups will merge and there'll be a lot of different protesters. You can see my photographer Justin panning off here. There are so many officers around this plaza right now. They've kind of taken over every corner. We've even seen buses and other police cars surrounding this square right here as more protesters start showing up this afternoon. The idea is to potentially stop the protesters from leaving this area because the last thing they want is to have them infiltrate the stadium. They want to be able to protect the stadium, and the people here say they're going to leave here and walk there. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. It's still the gathering stage right now. It could be about an hour before we see 3,000 people on Facebook said that they were coming, so we'll see if they show up. I wanted to go ahead and show you, because this is about the Olympics, they are handing out these pamphlets about the problems because of the Olympic Games. And it's kind of interesting when you go ahead and take a look at the map here. There's a number of housing issues, a number of environmental issues, people talking about pollution and dumping. One of the interesting things that people are very mad about is that golf is returning for the first time here at the Olympic Games in Rio, and it was built on land that's a preserve. It was a nature preserve, and so people upset even about that, whether it's their own housing or now the golf course that's taking over land that was protected. There's just been a lot of voices.
Jamie, Tony DeCopel here. We haven't met, but it's nice to meet you after fashion.
Nice to meet you.
The police presence you mentioned there, is it as large as you would expect? Were the police themselves thinking that the Olympics were going to attract contingents of activists and other demonstrators?
Well, Tony, this area, I was talking to our translator here, and he said, you know, over the last year, with everything that's been happening in the government, there have been a number of protests. Brazil is known for protests. But I think the police really ramped things up here because, I mean, it really every few feet, I don't know if we can go ahead and show again, but there's, you know, there's a police car there. There's police stopping and talking to the vendors here. Now, normally, if it wasn't the Olympic Games, this would not be taking place today, this little shopping market. This is usually an empty little park preserve, but it's really every few feet that you see police officers gathered, and that's really what we've been seeing throughout the city of Rio de Janeiro, to tell you the truth. It's along the beaches. You know, crime is something that people were very concerned about. Rio, not known to be the safest. You can actually see right now, Tony, the police walking in.
Oh, wow.
They were on a bus, and they're walking in riot gear right now.
Wow.
So this happening as we speak. Yeah, you can see them in their helmets, and this is the type of thing I was told will happen. They want to make sure that nothing gets out of control here. They want to make sure the protesters stay in this square, but this is sometimes the time where you can end up seeing clashes between the people who have gathered here and the police. So I'd say there's probably about 25 to 30 in this group, and then there's a second group coming.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about the militarization of police in the United States, that's a big conversation. That's a political conversation, a policy conversation. I see these officers walk through in quite a menacing fashion. I wonder, you mentioned clashes. There's a history in Brazil of interactions between individuals like that team of officers and demonstrators?
Well, ever since the economy started crumbling here, yes, there have been clashes between the police and people at these demonstrations. The other thing that people in Brazil will tell you about in Rio de Janeiro is within some of the favelas, the crime statistics are very high, and there is talk that police had gone in, and there's a number of officer-involved shootings that happen in Rio de Janeiro where they believe that because of the Olympic Games, there were people shot within the favela to keep crime rates down, maybe known drug traffickers and that kind of thing that weren't specifically doing anything but ended up in harm's way. Here's the second group of police now coming, and you can see it's about the same number as the first batch, and they're gathering somewhat around the demonstrators now. You still have those other police I was talking about on the sidelines kind of watching things. So this is kind of their show of solidarity right here.
But Jamie, I'm kind of curious overall, how has the presence been there of police on the ground? Have you seen any loud, boisterous protests? Has there been any reports of violence leading up to the Olympics?
Luckily, you know, today specifically, the protest that happened earlier along the beach was relatively calm. But I mean, the amount of police, Rena, if that's what you're asking me, is just, there's supposed to be 85,000 officers here on the ground. And from what I've seen, they are stationing them in all of the tourist hotspots, anywhere where there could potentially be trouble, anywhere where there could be protests. You are seeing this type of thing happen. But you can also see in this picture just how many journalists are here covering. Now, some of them, I was told, are activists, so they're doing activism online and trying to spread their message. Others, though, are from around the world, and they're here to cover the games. This is something that happens. You know, I was talking to a producer earlier that said, well, it's Brazil, protests happen all the time. But I think people within the government were hoping this type of thing would not happen and that we could move on to the opening ceremony. They were going to start, you know, talking about the fun, loving Brazilian culture. But there are a number of people very upset about the games being here because nothing changed for them. It was supposed to be one of those things they pitched that there would be economic prosperity, that the poor neighborhoods would get cleaned up, and none of that has happened. So you have a lot of strong voices on both sides, and you know, you just, at this point in time, it's been relatively calm here. Earlier today was calm, but there's even another protest, a big protest where people online have said they're going to gather at about 6 o'clock tonight near the stadium, and that would be a real problem for security, where we could end up seeing clashes there, because the last thing that they want when the world is watching is for protesters to be able to cross the line when they've talked about how secure the games are going to be here.
Of course, all eyes watching Rio, and hopefully it doesn't get violent. Jamie Yuccus, thank you very much, Jamie.